President Trump breaking his silence on the sudden and stunning departure of his longtime personal assistant, Madeleine Westerhout.
Donald Trump's personal assistant, the person who sits right outside the Oval Office all day long and sees and hears more than just about anyone else, is out of that sensitive and crucial post after an accusation that she dished about the president with reporters.
At just 34, Madeleine Westerhout is stepping back into the spotlight, and the story she's about to tell could shake the walls of the White House all over again. For years, she was at the very center of power, managing the president's schedule, overseeing the Oval Office, and seeing things almost no one else could. And then, suddenly, her world collapsed in a single night. Now, after years of silence, she's finally speaking out. But why now? What drove her to break her quiet oath and step into a courtroom that could change everything?
Madeleine Westerhout's back on the stand. She's already testified about Trump signing checks and Michael Cohen visiting the White House. And speaking of Cohen, we just learned that the prosecution's star witness will take the stand on Monday.
And most importantly, what secrets from her time with Donald Trump could come to light that the public has never heard before? Could her words rewrite parts of history? Could they change the way we see a presidency that was always shrouded in controversy? One thing is certain, this isn't just a story about politics. It's about loyalty, power, and the high stakes of being at the very heart of it all. The fall of the president's gatekeeper. She was more than a staffer. For years, she sat closer to Donald Trump than almost anyone else in Washington. She wasn't just scheduling his meetings or reminding him of phone calls. She controlled access to the president, managed sensitive communications, and was often the only person in the room who knew the full story behind the decisions being made in the Oval Office. Her name was Madeleine Westerhout, and in the early days of the Trump administration, she was both invisible and indispensable, a shadow operating at the heart of power. But the closer you are to the center, the more dangerous it becomes. One careless night, one reckless conversation, and one slip of the tongue ended her career in Washington. Overnight, she went from being the president's most trusted aide to an outsider with a reputation in tatters. For years, she disappeared from the public eye, retreating into silence. But now, in a courtroom full of cameras and reporters, she has chosen to speak. And the words she shared could send ripples far beyond her personal story, ripples that reach to the heart of one of the most controversial presidencies in American history. So, who was Madeleine Westerhout? How did she ascend so quickly into Trump's inner circle? What exactly happened that night in 2019? And why, after years of silence, has she stepped back into the public spotlight right in the middle of one of Trump's most serious legal battles? To understand, we need to rewind her story, all the way to her beginnings, her ambitions, and the turning points that defined her career. Madeleine Westerhout's story begins not in the halls of power, but in sunny Newport Beach, California. A young woman with ambition in her eyes and a focus that seemed almost too intense for her age, she set her sights on Washington, D.C. from the start. While others her age dreamed of glamorous jobs in business or entertainment, Madeleine's goal was singular: to be at the center of American politics. Her first steps toward that goal led her across the country. She enrolled at the College of Charleston in South Carolina, studying political science, and quickly became immersed in campaigns and local political operations. After graduating in 2013, she plunged into the political arena. Her first significant role was on Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign.
The election might already seem like a lifetime ago to you, but tonight a new message from Mitt Romney, as campaign sources offer a raw and telling portrait of the most painful week of Romney's political career.
An experience that gave her a taste of the intense pace and high stakes of national politics. By the next year, she was working for a Republican candidate, building her network and proving herself a force in a world where connections mattered as much as skill. Her dedication and efficiency caught the attention of Congressman John Campbell, who saw her potential and recommended her for positions within the Republican National Committee. Soon, she was working as the assistant to Katie Walsh, the RNC's chief of staff, gaining direct insight into the party's national operations and earning a reputation as someone who could be trusted with the most sensitive assignments. By 2015, Westerhout's reputation was growing. She had become known as a person who could manage chaos, anticipate the needs of senior leaders, and maintain discretion in high-pressure situations. And when Donald Trump declared his candidacy for president, she was ready. Her background in Republican politics, combined with her proven loyalty and organizational skills, positioned her to step into one of the most visible roles in the country. When Trump won the election in 2016, she achieved her ultimate goal. She was appointed special assistant to the president, a position that placed her in the West Wing and within inches of the most powerful office in the world. On January 20th, 2017, while the nation watched Trump's inauguration unfold, Westerhout walked into the White House not as a visitor, not as a journalist, but as someone with direct influence over the president's daily operations. From that moment on, her life changed forever. The woman beside the president. Outsiders saw her appointment and questioned it. She was young, relatively unknown, and had never held a role of such prominence. But Trump did not care about critics. He wanted her in the White House. Once inside, Westerhout quickly proved her worth. She handled the president's emails, monitored his schedule, and ensured that the flow of information to and from the Oval Office remained organized. She was present for meetings others only heard about secondhand and listened in on conversations that few were allowed to witness. In a political environment defined by secrecy, her access was extraordinary. The president himself highlighted their closeness, referring to her publicly as "my beauty." Trump signaled a personal and professional trust few aides enjoyed. She became a confidant, a gatekeeper, and someone who influenced not only what reached the president, but also how the operations of the West Wing were conducted. Her growing influence was both respected and resented. She wasn't merely a scheduler. She was the person who could let someone into the Oval Office or deny them. She shaped the president's day, managed his communication, and quietly directed the flow of power around him. By 2019, her promotion to Director of Oval Office Operations formalized her status as one of the most critical figures in the White House. Her responsibilities expanded, her influence deepened, and her role as the president's inner circle grew ever more visible, even if the public didn't realize it yet. But with prominence comes scrutiny. Media outlets started digging into her past, her relationship with the president, and her qualifications. Rumors circulated about her personal closeness to Trump and about whether she wielded influence beyond what her title suggested. She avoided interviews, rejected public appearances, and refused to become a political personality. While others chased headlines, she focused solely on her duties. Still, in a place as unforgiving as the White House, even a flawless record couldn't shield her from danger. And that danger arrived on one night in August 2019, a night that would redefine her career and send shockwaves across Washington. It was a seemingly ordinary evening. Westerhout attended a dinner with Deputy White House Press Secretary Hogan Gidley. Nothing about the event suggested it would be memorable, certainly not career-defining. But as often happens in politics, power can pivot on the smallest misstep. On that night, she drank more than she should have. In a moment of loosened judgment, she began sharing details she thought were private, remarks that would ultimately lead to her downfall. According to reports, she suggested she was closer to the president than his own children. She reportedly made comments about Tiffany Trump, implying that her father might not recognize her in a crowd and joking about her weight. Westerhout believed the conversation was off the record, a private exchange among colleagues. But in Washington, secrets rarely stay secret. Word of her remarks reached the president, and the consequences were swift and severe. Suddenly, her reputation and career were at stake. What had been an informal conversation at a dinner became national headlines. 1 week, she had been directing the operations of the Oval Office. The next, she was being asked to resign.
And in more news from the U.S., Madeleine Westerhout, Donald Trump's executive assistant, who resigned after sharing details about the first family, continues to be in the news. So much so that Trump himself has finally broken his silence, but his reaction might surprise some of you.
Her access revoked, her office emptied, her badge deactivated. She had been at the center of power, and now she was a complete outsider. Trump publicly expressed forgiveness, calling it a minor lapse in judgment. But forgiveness did not mean reinstatement. Westerhout was out of the White House, her role permanently terminated. To make matters even more final, she signed a non-disclosure agreement, legally binding her to silence on what she had witnessed inside the West Wing. For the first time, the reality of Washington's ruthless environment became undeniable. Her rise had been meteoric, but a single night had brought it all crashing down. From 2019 onward, Westerhout retreated. She refused interviews, stayed out of public commentary, and avoided political drama. But retreating didn't mean disengaging. From afar, she followed the Trump presidency with keen attention. She watched as controversies erupted, investigations into Epstein, renewed questions about Mar-a-Lago, and other scandals that unfolded after she left. She recognized familiar communication patterns, phrases she had helped craft, now being echoed by others in the administration. Friends from inside the White House continued feeding her information, small glimpses into the workings of an administration she once navigated daily. For years, she remained silent, bound by the NDA and aware that timing was everything. She did not seek revenge. She did not chase headlines. But she was preparing, not for a comeback, but for the moment when speaking out would truly matter. And in 2024, that moment arrived. Stepping back into the spotlight. For 5 years, Madeleine Westerhout had stayed silent. She had watched from the sidelines as Donald Trump's presidency unfolded, scandals erupted, and controversies swirled around the White House. She observed, quietly noting the patterns, the maneuvers, and the chaos she once helped manage. But she never spoke, until the moment became unavoidable. That moment arrived in April 2024. Trump faced court over a hush money case tied to a $130,000 payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Prosecutors alleged that his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, had orchestrated the payment and disguised it as legal fees. The trial was high-profile, messy, and politically charged. For Westerhout, it reopened old wounds. Her years of working closely with the president meant she knew details no one else did. The way he handled correspondence, the processes for financial transactions, and the subtle patterns of his daily operations. She had two choices: stay silent and let others define the narrative, or step into the courtroom and provide her insider account. For the first time since 2019, she chose the latter. When she entered the courtroom, it was as if the West Wing itself had followed her there. The press noticed her immediately. People who had once questioned her influence now recognized that she might hold the missing pieces of a complicated puzzle. The weight of her presence was palpable, a reminder that even years later, proximity to the president gave her power, if used wisely. Once called as a witness, Westerhout began recounting details that were, to most Americans, completely unknown. She described an unusual system for handling Trump's mail while he was living in the White House. Instead of changing the president's mailing address to Washington, letters and checks continued to arrive at Trump Tower in New York. From there, they went to his bodyguard, Keith Schiller, and were then passed to her for delivery to the president. To an outsider, this might sound trivial, just a logistical quirk. But to prosecutors, it raised red flags. Could this process have been designed to obscure financial documents? Could payments slip through without scrutiny? Westerhout explained how checks were often signed without the president reviewing them, a small but critical detail that prosecutors highlighted as a possible explanation for previously unexplained payments. Her testimony wasn't just technical. It painted a picture of a president's inner workings rarely seen by the public. It showed how closely she had been involved in day-to-day operations and how her presence offered insight into patterns of communication, decision-making, and control in the White House. For the courtroom, her words were both confirmation and revelation. Unlike her years of silence in the media, she spoke with clarity and purpose. Every detail she offered carried weight, both legally and politically. She was no longer the young assistant trying to survive inside the West Wing. She was now a credible, informed witness, providing an insider's perspective. Her return to the public eye was dramatic. On one hand, critics painted her as a figure seeking revenge, the former aide who had once been at the center of power, now speaking out to damage the man she once served. On the other hand, many saw her testimony as necessary transparency, a rare glimpse into the operations of an administration often shielded from public view. The courtroom appearance sparked debates across the nation. Was she vindictive or simply courageous? Did her words carry a political agenda, or were they a factual recounting of events? In either case, her testimony redefined the narrative. For a president who had long managed his public image carefully, Westerhout's insider account was both a challenge and a complication. Her actions also raised questions about the broader culture of the West Wing. How often were procedures like the mail system, check signing, and internal communications manipulated for convenience or secrecy? Westerhout's words, though centered on technical details, hinted at patterns that might have gone unnoticed by the public, but not by investigators. The fallout from her testimony extended beyond the courtroom. Politically, it reignited discussions about Trump's leadership style, decision-making, and internal operations. For the public, it was a rare opportunity to see the presidency from the perspective of someone who had been both loyal and close, yet now willing to speak openly. For Westerhout herself, the experience was transformative. She went from being a silent observer to a central figure in a nationally significant legal battle. Her career trajectory, once derailed by a single careless night, had shifted again, this time on her own terms. She had chosen when to speak, how to contribute, and what details mattered most. Yet the consequences were not purely professional. Public perception is unpredictable, and while some praised her courage, others criticized her timing and motivations. She became a symbol of the precarious nature of loyalty in politics. How someone at the pinnacle of trust can suddenly become a witness, a critic, or a liability. Madeleine Westerhout's story is, at its core, a reminder of how dangerous proximity to power can be. She was a trusted aide, a gatekeeper, a confidant, and yet her closeness also made her vulnerable. A single misstep ended her career in 2019. Years of silence did not erase the past, but they allowed her to observe, to understand, and ultimately, to choose the right moment to speak. Her courtroom testimony was more than just a recounting of facts. It was an illustration of the complex dynamics of loyalty, trust, and influence in politics. She had been both a participant in and a witness to the inner workings of the White House, and her words carried a dual weight, the weight of knowledge and the weight of history. For the public, it raised questions about accountability. How much of what happens behind the closed doors of the Oval Office ever reaches the American people? And how does one person navigate the fine line between discretion and truth? Westerhout's story provides insight into both, showing how power can elevate, how mistakes can destroy, and how timing can redefine one's role entirely. Breaking the silence. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of her journey is the choice to break silence. For 5 years, she could have remained invisible, forgotten by the public and the media alike. Instead, she waited. She watched, she listened, and she prepared. When the legal stakes were high, when her perspective mattered, she stepped forward. In doing so, She reminded everyone that proximity to power carries responsibilities, and sometimes it carries consequences. Her words added complexity to a legal case, provided insight into the daily operations of the presidency, and reshaped public perception of both herself and the man she once served. Madeleine Westerhout's story doesn't end in the courtroom. Her public reappearance has reopened debates about loyalty, transparency, and personal responsibility. Will she remain a political observer, or will this testimony become a stepping stone to a new chapter in her life? Can she redefine her public image, or will she forever be linked to both the scandal that ended her career and the testimony that brought her back into the spotlight? Her journey from trusted aide to disgraced assistant and now to courtroom witness is a cautionary tale about the volatile nature of political power. Alliances can shift overnight, reputations can be destroyed in a single moment, and yet, with careful timing and courage, those same individuals can reclaim influence in unexpected ways. As Americans watch the trial and the media dissect every detail, one question lingers. Was her testimony an act of revenge or a long overdue act of truth-telling? And what does it reveal about the inner workings of a presidency that was often hidden from public view? Madeleine Westerhout's story is a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change in politics. From the sunny streets of Newport Beach to the corridors of the White House, to a courtroom that captured the nation's attention, her path has been dramatic, precarious, and ultimately instructive. She demonstrates that loyalty has limits, discretion has costs, and timing is everything. And perhaps most importantly, her journey shows that sometimes, speaking out, even years after a mistake, can reshape the narrative, influence history, and illuminate the hidden corners of power. So, what do you think? Was her decision to testify brave or calculated? Did she step forward for justice or for personal vindication? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the stories behind the headlines. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, in politics, nothing is ever as it seems.